pleasure to be moderating this panel today on immigrant and refugee populations to examine the effects of current U.S. policies and acting agencies on the lives of people in the U.S. and abroad. So I'm just going to first introduce all three of the panelists. With us today, I'm going to provide each of them with some time to discuss specific policies and issues impacting immigrant populations in the U.S. Then I'm going to ask them specific targeted questions, and then we'll open it up to you guys, the audience, to engage in a dialogue with our speakers. So I'm pleased to introduce the speakers who are experts and activists in a number of ways on these critical issues. First, I want to welcome Katsia McKee from the Vera Institute of Justice. Ms. McKee is a program associate at the Center on Immigration and Justice at Vera. She works specifically within the Unaccompanied Children program that provides legal information and services to detained adults and children to help make immigration courts more efficient. And prior to working at Vera, she was a volunteer attorney in the Immigration Protection Unit of the New York Legal Assistance Group, providing direct legal services to low-income immigrants in matters involving applications for new non-immigrant status, adjustment of status, and asylum. And she's also worked as a clinical student at the Nationality Service Center in Philadelphia and as a legal intern at the American Civil Liberties Union in Pennsylvania. And she received her JD from Temple University Beasley School of Law and her BA in Political Science and Human Rights from Dartmouth College. And our second panelist is Mr. Donald Antonison, who is an organizer at Families for Freedom, which is a New York-based multi-ethnic defense network vying for immigrants facing and fighting deportation. Mr. Antonison was born in Antigua and is involved in civil and social issues in Antigua and the Caribbean. He is also actively involved in community organizing of the Antiguan diaspora in New York, and works in advocacy against police brutality and anti-racial responses to immigration. At Families for Freedom, Mr. Antonison was a former board member and also led efforts of the International Refugee Justice Campaign, demanding that foreign governments defend their nationals in the deportation process. And then third, we have Mr. Luis Argueta, who is an acclaimed international film director, whose recent film, Abused, the Postal Rate, is about the May 12, 2008 U.S. immigration raid of a kosher meatpacking plant in Postal, Iowa. The Postal Rate presents just one of the many instances of exploitation and government abuses against immigrants in the U.S. And Mr. Argueta was born and raised in Guatemala and received his bachelor's degree in industrial engineering and a master's degree in Romance languages from the University of Michigan. He is a recipient of numerous international awards, and in April 2009, the British newspaper The Guardian listed him as one of Guatemala's national living icons. Great. Welcome, everyone. I was speaking too loudly into the mic. So first, Ms. McKee, if you can start us off. And just let me know if I need to speak up or speak down. I'm very honored to be here, so thanks to everyone at the NYU Social Work School for having me here, and also thank you to my co-panelists who are incredibly impressive and in an intimidating way. So I'm here mainly to talk about, so Vera's Center on Immigration and Justice does a lot of different work around immigration. So we work with a national network of providers who deal with adults in immigration detention, and my program, which works with unaccompanied children. And then we also do some work around police-immigrant relations. So those are some of our main areas. But today I'm here to talk about a somewhat less known subpopulation of immigrants who are in detention, and a particularly vulnerable population. I'll explain more about why that is in a few minutes. And so I just wanted to give you a quick overview of what I'll be covering. So I'm going to talk about, just give you, just a basic overview of unaccompanied alien children, or UAC as we call them. It's kind of the term of art. And talk about, kind of the laws and policies that affect them and the different stakeholders involved in their detention and their legal process.
And then I'm going to sort of talk about a little bit about Vera's role in working with in our unaccompanied children program, and then mainly focus on some of the policy considerations and concerns, especially in light of comprehensive immigration reform, which is on its way, hopefully. And so talking about what advocates around the country have been working on to improve the system for unaccompanied children. So what is an unaccompanied alien child, or UAC? So it's basically an individual under the age of 18 who has entered the U.S. without authorization and who does not have a parent or legal guardian available to provide care and custody for them in the United States. And so just a little bit about the demographics of this population. Unaccompanied children come from all over the world and speak many languages and are escaping many different types of dire circumstances, but the vast majority of children are young boys between the ages of 14 and 17 from Central America, so El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, and more often than not, they're usually escaping some sort of violence, abuse, abandonment, or neglect, particularly associated with gang violence in Central America. One of the major issues that's been in the news lately, I don't know if you saw, there was Sonia Nazario just recently published an op-ed in the New York Times about unaccompanied children and the need for representation because of the incredibly escalating numbers of children that are coming in the country in the last 2 years. So just to give you a snapshot, between 2011 and 2012, the number of children unaccompanied children entering the U.S. Went from 7,000 to 14,000, so the number doubled, and the projected numbers for this year are between 20 and 24,000. So a lot of organizations have been trying to figure out and study why this increased number is occurring. Some of the theories are, escalating gang violence in Central America is driving a lot of kids to come to the U.S. to reunify with family that are here. Issues related to agriculture and farming and flooding. So there's a variety of different reasons. But so the need to sort of understand this population and to figure out how to best serve them in terms of both legal and social services has become increasingly important. So in terms of just the sort of laws and policies of the U.S. that affect these unaccompanied children, I wanted to just point out two of the main ones. The first is the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act, or the TVPRA, which was actually just reauthorized this year in 2013. And that sets forth, just basically creates statutory protections for kids, basically from the time that they're apprehended by Customs and Border Protection, or CBP, through their legal proceedings. And then the other important piece of policy arose out of what's called the Flores Settlement Agreement, which is basically a settlement that was reached as a result of a lawsuit brought on behalf of unaccompanied children, which basically sets forth the rights that they have in detention. So basically, for example, the right to education, the right to clothing and food, and the right to be in the least restrictive setting. So the mandate is for children to be, to the extent possible, released to a family member and not held in detention. So those are some of the protections that have been set into place, based under the laws and policies of the U.S. For unaccompanied children. And then so some of the stakeholders or agencies that are involved in implementing these policies and sort of are involved in the system for unaccompanied children are, the main one is the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is part of Health and Human Services, and that agency is responsible for the care and custody of the children. And then there are so Customs and Border Protection and ICE, who are responsible for taking care of apprehending children at the border. And then also state courts get involved with children in two ways. So first, if children are apprehended internally, meaning they've spent some time in the U.S., maybe they came here as small children, they usually get picked up because they had some involvement with the juvenile justice system. So that's one way that ICE apprehends them and puts them into detention. And then secondly, there's a form of immigration relief called special immigrant juvenile status that has been created for children who have been abused, abandoned, or neglected. And in order to obtain that status, children first have to go into state court and have a state court judge say that they have been abused or abandoned or neglected based on that state's law. So they often get entangled into the state court system as well. And then finally, and I'll talk more about this in a second, children, there are legal service providers and child advocates involved in these children's cases. So that's where VERA sort of comes in. So VERA, we basically have a contract from the Office of Refugee Resettlement to manage and provide technical assistance to a national network of 18 legal services providers around the country and one provider of child advocate or guardian ad litem services that operates in Chicago and South Texas. So basically, child advocates are responsible for advocating for the best interests of the child. And so we basically work with them, and they provide know your rights presentations, legal screenings, and to the extent possible, pro bono matching kids with volunteer attorneys who will take their cases, and also in some limited circumstances will provide representation to the children in immigration court. So that's kind of an overview of the system and VERA's role, and I'm definitely happy to take questions because I know it's somewhat complex. So I wanted to focus a little bit on kind of the policy considerations and what makes these children particularly vulnerable, and how they're treated so much. The immigration system treats children so much differently than children in our domestic juvenile court and juvenile justice system. So one of the major things is, as compared to most state child welfare systems, where a child is in most cases automatically appointed a child advocate, or what we call a guardian ad litem, to advocate for the child's best interest, that doesn't happen in the immigration system, or in a very limited capacity. We do have one organization called the Young Center for Immigrant Children's Rights based in Chicago, and they're able to provide services in Chicago and to some degree in South Texas, but that's pretty much the limit of what they're able to do given the limited amount of resources that they have. And then another major difference is that in the juvenile justice system in most states, when a child comes in at the age of 18, or under the age of 18, and they're in the juvenile justice system, they are, protected throughout the course of their proceedings, even if they turn 18, during their court proceedings. That's not true for children who are in the immigration system. Children in the immigration system, once they turn 18, basically all of their protections are sort of stripped, and they could potentially face transfer to adult detention, which would be the conditions and the treatment they would receive in adult detention would be very different from the system that they're in as children. And also just their ability to pursue certain types of legal relief changes when they turn 18. And so the system doesn't really protect them, even though they have entered at a point when they were most vulnerable. That status doesn't stay with them throughout their entire legal proceedings. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit now about kind of what advocates have been doing to try to reform the system. One of the major things is to make the system function such that once a child enters the country and is labeled an unaccompanied child, that status and the protections that come along with it stay with them, throughout the course of their legal proceedings. And then, and the other thing is that most of the services right now are being provided to children while they're in detention, and there's just a tremendous lack of services once they're released to family members. Very few legal resources and sources of legal services are available to them. So that's been a big push to try to get more services for kids once they're out in the community, so that they can go to court and fight their case and have a lawyer. So I wanted to give one example just before I close about how this can play out in an individual child's case. Last night I actually was at a play that was done by an organization called Houses on the Moon. The play is called De Novo, and I believe they're having shows later on in April, and I can tell you more about that. But it was about a child who came to the U.S. to escape gang violence in Guatemala and to reunite with his mother. And as a result of his isolation and alienation and the breakup of his family, when he came here, he became involved in the gangs in Los Angeles. And he eventually, because of some arrests, was picked up by ICE and put into detention. And he was lucky to have a lawyer to fight his case. And the lawyer was pursuing an asylum case, arguing that he needed asylum in the U.S. because he was escaping potential persecution by gangs. Unfortunately, this young man lost his case, and the attorney really wanted to appeal, but the child was so demoralized and so psychologically damaged from being in detention for such a prolonged period that he decided to take voluntary departure and leave the country. And it turned out that 2 weeks after he returned to Guatemala, he was shot by gang members. And so that just brought to life for me, and I hope for others, like the need to draw attention to these issues and to understand how vulnerable these children are and how in need of legal representation they are. And I think, I'd like to close by just, bringing up the issue of, we're talking so much about deferred action for childhood arrivals, and this has been framed in a way that's, very focused on the fact that these children have done nothing wrong and they've been here for years, and I think that story is important, but I think it leaves out this very vulnerable population of children who have been drawn into violence, not necessarily of their own will, and who are equally vulnerable and in need of protection. So that's it.
My name is Donald, and just following up on that, and also the previous speaker, the keynote speaker, is kind of up. Maybe it's good. Sorry, formulation. I'm an organizer with Families for Freedom, and similar to Glenn Martin, who spoke before, directly impacted person. Our organization basically deals with people who are at the front line of the immigration policies, but also on the front line of the criminal issues also. Non-citizens of the United States who have a criminal conviction usually face deportation, specifically after laws that were passed in 1996. Families for Freedom was formed in 2002 because of the increase in deportations for people with criminal convictions, but also the aftermath of 9/11. You saw massive communities being attacked, brown and black, not only Muslims, but definitely the whole issue of criminal past played a serious role in the group being formed. Again, most of our members are directly impacted or directly affected. Myself, been arrested 18 years before I got stopped by ICE for misdemeanor, got detained off planet, I would say, because that's how they look at us. We are aliens, the names that they use. Glenn had pointed out one of the main things that he never says convict, he never says criminal, stuff like that. When we enter the system, our names are taken away. We're given a number, and most times through the process we are recognized by that number. So the system basically takes away our humanity. And a lot of the conversation so far this morning, I think the Dean people who opened up and also Glenn spoke about humanity in the system. And just what Sia spoke of, it's also points to the humanity. I'm just going to keep it as close as possible to my outline. Like Glenn, I didn't like the speech, I was speechless, but after he dropped down, I was even more so speechless because what he talks about, we face, but we also face a more definite and tragic issue. We get exiled. So while people can go back to this society here in the country, more than likely we are exiled to sometimes places we haven't been from since we were youths. And that is how, even back in the 20s, Supreme Court justices considered deportation. It was exile. And there was no, one justice said basically there was no cooler judgment than that. But jumping ahead and jumping back and forth, because everything has been laid out, is that this criminal system here in New York represents for us one of the most serious threats. We go to court sometimes for misdemeanors, things that are on the street that are not considered dangerous to anybody else, smoking marijuana, whatever it is, possession, we end up in the criminal system. Like Glenn says, 86 to 96% of us cop a plea because we don't want to sit down inside this in Rikers over a simple possession or a disorderly conduct. Because the double issue of not being a citizen of the United States, we face more than just taking on that plea. We face, like I said before, exile. So we also have to really think about whether or not we take a plea, whether or not we go to trial, and all those things that Glenn spoke about. And I'm going to write in a lot of things that he said, because that lays the foundation for where we are as non-citizens in this country. The simplest of things that we cross in terms of the legal issue puts us in serious danger. It puts us in danger where our families are separated. It puts us in danger of losing all the things that we put down here. And it doesn't matter whether or not you're unauthorized or you have a green card. Once you're not a citizen of the United States, you can be deported. So the issue of, oh, these are good kids, DACA, or these are not so good kids because they're always there in gangs, it don't matter one way or the other. You're not a citizen, you cross that line wherever it is, you are liable to be deported. And deported for some things that are, one, misdemeanors, but when you enter immigration, they become some weird label as an aggravated felon. Crimes that were not aggravated or felonies on the street, in immigration system becomes aggravated felonies. That carries a burden of being mandatory detainable and mandatory deportable. Unlike the criminal system where, spoke about law and order and everybody knows the routine. If you don't have a lawyer, one will be provided for you. You know how it is. That don't apply in immigration. If you don't have a lawyer, you cannot afford a lawyer, you have to fight the system yourself. And when we say the system, it is the system. It is the United States total legal system that's put against you. One, you enter the immigration system more than likely with a criminal conviction. And if y'all know the criminal system, like Glenn and everybody spoke about, there's not much fairness in there. We spoke about taking away the discretion from judges in the criminal system, more so in immigration. Immigration is a civil matter. It is not a criminal matter. Because of criminal past, we end up in immigration and then treated worse than criminals. The due process that most people know about, it's not afforded to us. The conditions in detention centers, you may have heard about if y'all are studying, you guys are social workers, more than likely y'all have tapped into some of these stories. It is not something that people want to accept, or even, some people are not even aware what goes on in these places. Detention centers are placed sometimes down south, way down in the boondocks, and even the people in those states don't even know they exist. You're taking people from New York to Louisiana, Reputation on in Louisiana, Alabama, those places. So, it's kind of crazy. It's purgatory. It's like limbo. I don't know. Do anyone know what limbo is? That's what the immigration system is. We have a thing at Families of Freedom that we say, wherever immigration starts and deportation is where logic ends. And that is what it is. You go to the criminal system, sometimes you're not aware that copping a plea will get you in problems. You make the plea, you figure you want to get out, you don't get out. You see that you have a bond or bail, you pay the bail, and they're so devious right now. For immigrants, the bail is $1. And if you go into the criminal system, you see you got a bail for $1, of course you're going to jump in it. But the key card is once you pay for that dollar, it puts you right into immigration. You do not walk out the system. And the criminal system right now is getting so close to the immigration system, it's unbelievable. 2 years ago, we fought against secure communities. Secure communities is one of ICE's programs in terms of making it easy to lock us up, or to catch us, or whatever they call it. Because ICE had a program called Endgame, which is to deport every single removable person that they can find. So over the process of this NBM program, there's stages and they have different policies within that. So the most recent one and the most effective one for them, as far as I'm concerned, is secure communities. Secure communities basically is a request. It was a request, it wasn't supposed to be mandatory. And it comes down to the fact that once a non-citizen comes in contact with law authorities, that information could then arrest. Once they go in, fingerprints go directly to the FBI. Same time the fingerprints goes to Homeland Security. If a hit comes up, that person as a non-citizen, a detainer is placed on them, or request is placed to hold that person. Now imagine in a city like New York City, we have secure communities that is active, and we have stop and frisk. Stop and frisk seems to operate in communities that black and brown people are more dominant, or with the largest population. Immigrants come in, whoa, 1 minute. Sorry. Anyway, I'm gonna steal a couple. For us as non-citizens, real quickly, we got major issues, one from the criminal part and the other part from the immigration. What we notice the system, both systems are now coming so close together that you can't distinguish them. Stop and frisk for us is similar to SB 1070. Serious racial profile. We get stopped because whatever reason the communities that as immigrants we come into. We do not come as immigrants into the privileged society. We usually end up, regardless whether or not is a Latino, we end up in the communities that are poor anyway. Stop and frisk, secure communities guarantees that we end up in the system one way or the other. And Glenn had spoken about the cost and the benefits for having these systems, whether or not to stop and frisk or whether or not to the removal proceedings. But there's a devious and ugly part of it where people make money off locking us up. When he spoke about jail and the private prison industry, you need to understand that they made, between jail and CCA, they made $3 billion off of locking us up. That is not a product that is being produced. We are commodities. They use us as commodities. So the system itself is just benefiting off of us. There's no value to these systems. And you know, it's kind of crazy where we are right now. Mentioned comprehensive immigration reform. The latest thing that I heard from since last night is that there's going to be a component about gang issues. That people who are considered to be gangs are going to be denied the so-called path to legalization that they're speaking about. So from all angles, we're going to be hit. The criminal system, the immigration system, and as social workers, there's some massive things that are missing for all people. Some of us are released back into communities, and like Glenn said, we can't find them. Our families are left back behind, separated, going through the system, but because we're immigrants, don't have access to a whole bunch of stuff that could help us. We have people who contemplate suicide because their loved ones is inside. And we as families of freedom are not prepared to do that. We don't know how to address those issues. All we can do is just basically try to help people. We have a hotline that goes off the wall, 24/7. We have a staff of four of us. I wish we had 200 people like Glenn was saying. The unfortunate thing which you don't want to wrap up is that Families of Freedom has a sort of reputation of being this, oh, we do the great work, way. It's kind of dangerous to put all that kind of praise on one group when the situation is much, much more larger. The destruction that is being wrought on our families is going to be reflected soon on the larger societies, both here in America and where people are being deported to.
Good morning. Thanks for the invitation, Keisha, and social work and NYU, and it's an honor to be here with my fellow panelists. I would like to speak a little bit about the film I made. There are some posters about it. If you don't have one, see me afterwards and I'll give you one. The film is called Abuse, the Postal Rate, and it's a documentary about the largest, most expensive, and most brutal customs immigration enforcement raid in the history of this country. Who ever heard of Postal, Iowa? I see a show of hands. Who ever heard of Iowa? Well, I went to school in Michigan, and I had never been to Iowa. And in the 9 years that I was there, I never went to Iowa. And I thought I knew the Midwest, but until I went to Iowa, I realized I didn't. How many heard about the Postal Rate?
Because of you.
Well, I really think that everybody should know about that rate because it's really one of the darkest moments in our legal history as a country. And I think as social workers, you also should see the effects of that rate. So this rate, this film, shows the devastating effects of U.S. immigration enforcement policies on families, children, and communities. What happened on the morning of May the 12th, 2008, almost 5 years ago, was that 900 federal agents with assault weapons and with the support of helicopters and state troopers descended into Postville, Iowa, a little town in the northeast corner of the state, a little town in the country, I call it, with big streets, nobody closes their doors, and you would think it's, you know, you arrive in bucolic Americana until you dig deep, like in that film Blue Velvet. I also recommend this. So, 900 armed federal agents come into town with helicopters hovering over in black SUVs and followed by big white jails with wheels. And they surrounded the meatpacking plant in this town. The town has a population of 2,000. The plant employs close to 900. This is the morning shift, so there's about half of that group working. And they proceed to arrest, handcuff, and chain 389 undocumented workers that were there at that time. Among these workers, there were women, there were underage, there were children, and there were men, mainly from Mexico and Guatemala. In that morning, the federal government spent $5.2 million of our tax dollars to arrest parents, mothers, and underage workers who were just trying to feed their families. Families were separated. In the film, we see two women who were afraid to tell the authorities that they had underage children at home. And they were afraid because they were thinking that the kids would be arrested and taken to jail with them, which is what the agents that were interrogating them said. These two women were sent to a place called the National Cattle Congress, a place where farmers usually show their cattle. And if anybody tells me that that was a coincidence, I say, sure. So they take these workers from processing meat and take them to a fairgrounds, and they process them like meat. The former president of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, David Leopold, said this was a judicial assembly line that was designed to convict and deport all of these workers. And one of the things that the film does is show how this pie was very well prepared. And one of the intersections of what the film does with what my colleagues have been saying, and what Glenn talked about, is the criminalization of immigrants. As my colleague to the right pointed out, immigration is an administrative fault. But these workers were charged with aggravated identity theft. However, as Glenn pointed out, they were given an offer they couldn't refuse. They were offered a plea deal. Accept that you've been here using fake documents, take a 5-month prison sentence, and then we will deport you. Opposed to waiting for your day in court for maybe 5, 6, 7, who knows how many months. We cannot guarantee how long you'll be in jail. Then we'll try you for aggravated identity theft. And if we find you guilty, as of 9/11, aggravated identity theft carries a minimum 2-year sentence. So you might go to jail for 2 years, and you might have to pay a fine up to $250,000. Everybody signed. I think everybody here would have signed if that was the choice. Now, by being deported, they became instantly convicted felons, and they got this ban to come back, who enables them to even try to come back for 10, 15, or 20 years. Something that I have found in producing this film and continue to working with the immigrants from Postville is that the system did not really screen them the way they should have been screened for qualifications that would have entitled them to some kind of remedy, such as the U visa. However, because there were many women that were left and sent home with an ankle bracelet to take care of their children, and there were also some of those children that were working. There was a group that remained in Iowa and who the community helped, and who a lawyer began to interview and found out that they had been victims of sexual abuse, of criminal violent crimes within the plant, and all the underage kids were victims of child labor violations. So today, the good news about this horrible event is that a little bit over 50 people got primary U visas, and a lot of them, especially the underage kids, were able to solicit the same treatment for their immediate relatives, parents, brothers, wives, and children. So you have about 150 people who are now working legally, unfortunately, in the same plant in Iowa. But that is one of the positive things about the Violence Against Women Act, which is the act that has the U visa as one of its provisions. I see that my time is almost over. So I just want to point out another factor where immigration and the criminal justice intersect. While the cost of holding an inmate in prison rises, so does the population of detainees. It costs $122 to $160 to hold one prisoner for 1 day. And that, as Glenn pointed out, is very good business for some people. So, ironically, because of the new budget cuts, ICE has released a few immigrant detainees and have sent them home with this ankle bracelet, which is certainly a very harsh way to control the population. I just want to make a plug for the film. You know, with the new bipartisan interest in immigration reform, we have found that this film really addresses all of the issues about what's happening here, the sending the push factors and the pull factors that are bringing the numbers of immigrants up. Not quite up, but at least it's remaining the same, in spite of the fact that we deport over 1,000 people a day. Now think about that, over 1,000 people a day. Most of them have families, so the effect on their families is very similar to the rate in Postville. Maybe not, the trauma won't be as big because kids won't have to hear the helicopter and know that their mother won't be home when they get home after school. But 1,089 was last year, actually. That is 3 times the number of people that were deported from Postville. So we really need to keep learning, keep educating ourselves, and keep really pushing for a decent, human-based, and sensible, respectful of workers' rights, human rights, and civil rights of immigrants in the new bill that hopefully will come in next week. And it sounds like a very harsh one. Last thing to close, I'd like to bring to your attention is that on the Friday, May the 10th, in front of the courthouse in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, there will be a gathering commemorating the 5th anniversary of the Postal Iowa immigration raid. The purpose of the event is to remember the 389 persons who were arrested on May the 12th, to reconcile with those who contributed to the injustices, and to advocate for comprehensive immigration reform. If I can get an email list later, I can send the press release to everybody. And one thing we're doing is calling into groups to have their own small or larger or medium-sized event on that same day or on May the 12th. And one more piece of news is that on May the 12th in Iowa, in Iowa Public Television, Abuse the Postal Rate will be finally screened after they had blocked the screening of it when it had its national premiere last December the 4th. And we're hoping that it will also be screened in the program America Reframed and the channel Whole World Cross Country. So thank you very much, and I think we're going to
Thank you guys for your really poignant discussions. All of you touched upon really important issues involving the immigration and criminal justice system. So I'll start us off with a question and then we'll open it up. So at the beginning of this month, the Associated Press released that it would no longer sanction the use of the term illegal immigrant or the use of the word illegal to describe a person. And many of you touched upon how immigrants are labeled today and how these labels can really impact how individuals are treated or perceived. And as social workers, we're often concerned with the terms we use to describe our clients and how that might influence our work and our relationships with the people we serve. So by reading the style book of this term, many acknowledged the Associated Press and compelled other media sources such as the New York Times to work on revising the use of the term illegal or illegal immigrant. So do any of you have reactions on this shift, and can you provide insight on how this might impact or change policies impacting these populations, if at all?
Sure. No, I mean, I think. Oh, yes. I think it was a very positive piece of news. I think, I mentioned sort of a little bit, and everyone on this panel has mentioned a little bit about rhetoric and labels and how we talk about things and how that needs to change. And I think it's really important to start, making that shift. And since I'm coming from a policy perspective, I guess it's interesting. I know I mentioned about DACA and how that whole issue has been framed and how I think it might be somewhat problematic in terms of like not acknowledging the vulnerability of other populations because they're perceived as criminal or somehow violent or gang affiliated, etc. And I think that change is often, very incremental, and I think that even like talking about DACA and the way we do is extremely positive. I don't think it tells the whole story, and so I feel the same way about this, the AP's move to move away from illegal immigration. I think it's a really good incremental first step. I think there's still a lot of work to be done, i.e. the New York Times to get on the ball. And so I think other media outlets need to start talking about this differently. And I think, even just sort of like getting the word undocumented immigrant out of the language and just using adjectives like that to describe human beings, I think is incredibly problematic. But I think, from my perspective, I think it's a really positive step in terms of transforming the rhetoric around these issues.
Well, personally, from a families of freedom point of view, and also direct impacted, we're not impressed. Because straight up, we've been saying for the longest while, and I think Glenn and the opening, I think the dean basically had said, look, it's about humanity. And the tools that the power structure use is a major issue. No one is legal is a simple thing to say. But really and truly, why say it in the first place? I'm not giving the AP any kind of credit to saying we stop using the legal word. Because they've been told, we've been explained to them why it's detrimental to even bring in a proper conversation about the issues that we face. America and the power structure seems to be Egyptians. They're swimming in denial. Yeah, that may be funny, but in reality, there is a deeper issue that we keep ducking from, which is racism and the issue of exclusion. Regardless wherever the immigration policies go, they do not include. The first thing they say is who we're going to keep out. So whether or not they use illegal, alien, immigrant, there's one point, there's a word, I don't see it anymore, immigrant, which began with an E. The prefix that they put on the words when they label us is negative. So I don't see why we should say to AP, because there's been a long campaign to get them to say, stop saying illegal. Illegal. Illegal is a negative prefix. We're human beings. Alien, you guys are students, social workers. When you're discussing stuff with people, are you going to say, well, you're an illegal alien? Like, where did I come from? Pluto. You know, and it sounds funny, but it works on your mind. No one wants to hear criminal. Glenn was saying, you can't even go to a job and you're trying to say, well, I can't say this guy is a convict. We're human beings. Put humanity back into it. Just real quickly though, talking about media. Yesterday, Boston Globe published a story about an Irish nanny who's been charged with murder of the youth that she was watching. It took 12 paragraphs before they even said she was an undocumented person. They call it illegal or undocumented, whatever. We go back and look in just the Boston Globe, and because of the story they came up with. 2 examples straight up. Illegal alien killed somebody because they're drunk. Constantly, they put in illegal, especially when it comes to people of color. Goes back to my original thing. Immigration is used as a tool for exclusion, not inclusion, and more so nowadays. So again, I'm sorry, I can't give AP and USA props for stop saying illegal.
I think it was about time that the AP did that. And I think it's definitely time for the New York Times to follow suit. And we can all write to the New York Times and say, do it. So I do give them some credit. However, I also agree that words are used to dehumanize immigrants and minorities. And they are, in the minimal case, used to allow us to arrest them and treat them like they deserve the horrible treatment that they're getting. And at worst, it takes us to genocide. So it really, I think one of the purposes of me making the film was to show that the immigrants are really not the other. They're like us, that there's a bonding humanity, and that saying, therefore the grace of God go I, is very much a guiding tool for me, and something that I always stress when I show the film at colleges. So words are important, and I think that this was a small step in the right direction.
Thank you, guys. So I want to open it up for one or two questions from the audience. So does anyone have any questions for the panelists? It's your chance. Sure.
Just everybody, what sort of general things would you like to see in this new bill that is supposed to be coming out in the coming weeks,
The question was, what do you guys expect or want to be coming out in the new bill that's coming up in the next week, hopefully?
A lot of things. I could sit here and have a laundry list of everything, even outside, I mean, well outside of like just children's realm, which is what I work in, but I definitely, I think having just really pushing hard to, for legal representation for immigrants and getting more people out of detention, as many people as possible. I don't think this huge number of people needs to be detained, and I think reforming the detention system, which is unfortunately does not appear to be among the main priorities of CIR, or comprehensive immigration reform. So I don't know exactly how optimistic I am about those changes, but those are the changes that I would wish for, just getting people lawyers and getting them out of detention.
Again, I just have to go back on the whole thing about words again. It's not necessarily what people want, it's what's needed. It needs to be straight up inclusive, and including people who, like Glenn was saying, one issue in their life does not make them less of a human being. So there are a couple of things that are needed. One, to remove the whole concept of detention, which makes us somewhat flat versus to society, when the criminal system already did their thing, judged us and said, well, serve your time and go about your business. So there's needs in the comprehensive immigration bill that has to be in there. And one of the main things is to remove the whole concept of aggravated felonies, because that in itself is just bizarre.
I think that what I would like to see in the bill is definitely a map or a road to citizenship, and reunification of families at the forefront. We have over 4 million children, U.S. citizen children, living in mixed status families, and that is a very serious situation that needs to be addressed. And finally, I would like to see the mention for the need to address the sources of our present immigration situation. Unless we address the push factors that have people risking everything to come here, we will not be able to stop this flow of people looking not for a major betterment in their life, but sometimes, most of the times, a simple survival.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Well, I'm just curious, as future social workers, what could we, for example, do for the unaccompanied children or children living in detention centers? I know there was one, I forget where exactly, but the kids weren't even going to school, and these were like 5 or 6-year-olds. And how do you embarrass the government enough or address it so that they're saying, okay, we can't keep ignoring this, and people are noticing that we're treating children this way?
Did everyone hear the question?
I think, as I was saying, I think a lot of the problem with the way the system functions right now is that because of the surge of kids, originally the system was designed so that kids were getting a lot of services while they were in detention. And it's really interesting that you bring this up, because it's becoming a real problem getting kids access to all the services they need, including social and legal services, because the kids are actually moving through the system really fast and they're getting transferred all over the place. And I think, Donald can speak to this, it happens a lot with adults as well. And I think there really needs to be a shift, because what's happening is these kids are, unlike the adult detention system, the real push is to get the kids released to sponsors to the extent, because oftentimes these kids are coming to find relatives, you know, out that are in the country. They're coming to find their parents, and so they just end up entangled in this very complex system when they cross the border and are apprehended. And so they, you know, they're now, you know, what's called reunifying quicker and quicker, and there's so few services for them once they're out of detention, actually, and they become even more vulnerable. And not to say that they should spend more time in detention, but the way the services work, they don't get enough services once they're out to make sure they're getting access to things like education. And, you know, what that often results in is kids, you know, becoming, you know, victimized again. And so, you know, I think, like, actually, there's a hope that there's going to be a new study that's going to come up specifically focused on sort of unaccompanied children living in New York and trying to, it's basically a needs assessment, trying to figure out what services these kids need, you know, when they're in the community, and just trying to be, like, find more support. And I think, you know, there's, just in terms of what, you know, you all can do as social workers, I mean, there's tons of, you know, volunteer opportunities. I know that, if you want to get more involved in these issues, I know the Ferrick Center at Fordham is starting to do a lot more work with trying to get kids legal screenings, the kids who are in detention. So that's one aspect, and just, you know, there's so much that needs to be done for kids, you know, once they're out in the community, and also, you know, also in detention. And in terms of just services for kids in detention, you know, as I mentioned, there is that, you know, the Flora settlement agreement, and you know, the attorneys that work with the kids, the attorneys that we work with, you know, all around the country, like, are very, and the social workers as well, like, are very involved in making sure that the kids that are detained are getting the services they need, because they're obligated under law to have those services. And so, but yeah, I mean, I think just in terms of involvement, just there's a lot of work going on right now, even just in New York, related to these issues. There's a big surge of kids that are going to be detained in New York, and we work with a provider called Catholic Charities of New York, that they serve the kids in the detention facilities up in Westchester, I believe. And so, you know, they're always looking for volunteers, and there's tons of ways to get involved. So, I mean, I don't know if, you know, I can make my contact information available or whatever, if people are interested in getting connected with that sort of work. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Thank you to all our panelists, and I think that's time.
Yeah.
That's time. Sorry. If you have questions, you can talk to the panelists afterwards. During lunch.
I just wanted to make a quick announcement, and I really think the panelists is awesome. I just wanted to also, Rachel just asked about what people can do. How many people know that May 1st is, like, just weeks away? May Day is a National Day of Immigrant and Workers' Rights. And we're right here in Union Square. People are going to be gathering at 12 o'clock. So particularly for folks at NYU, this would be a day, and I wish that we had banners as social work students, that we could come. I know the radical social workers are going to be marching, that we can come and march and show our solidarity, not just as students or as workers, but as folks are saying, as activists, as people really concerned about this issue. So 12 noon on May Day, which is Wednesday, am I right? Wednesday, May 1st, 12 o'clock noon. If folks can be in Union Square and march together, that would be awesome. And again, I just wanted to thank the panelists.